He woke up before the sun because his child always did. The small room was quiet except for slow breathing from the bed near the wall. He moved carefully so he would not wake the child. Life had taught him to be careful with every step every day. Felt like a balance between being strong and being gentle. He was a single dad who had not planned this life, but accepted it fully. After the mother left years ago, he became everything: teacher, cook, comfort, and protector. Money was always tight. Time was even tighter. He worked long hours at a local repair place, fixing old machines that most people had forgotten. He never complained, because complaining did not change anything. That morning was like many others. He packed food, washed clothes, and helped his child get ready for school. The child smiled while eating breakfast and talked about small dreams and silly ideas. Those moments gave him strength. He watched the child walk into the school building and waited until the door closed before turning away. On his walk to work, he stopped by a small shop to buy cheap coffee. Always went to the same place because the owner knew him and sometimes gave him an extra cup without asking questions. That day, the shop was more crowded than usual. He waited patiently near the door, holding his cup and looking at the floor. That was when he heard a soft voice asking if the seat next to him was free. He looked up and saw a woman who seemed nervous. Her hands shook slightly as she held her phone. He nodded and she sat down. They did not talk at first. Silence felt normal to him. He was used to it. After a moment, she spoke again. She asked if he was waiting for someone. He said no, just resting before work. She smiled, but her eyes showed stress, like she was carrying something heavy inside. Her phone buzzed, and she sighed deeply. He tried not to stare, but he noticed how tired she looked. Even though she was well dressed, she suddenly laughed in an awkward way and said she knew this sounded strange, but she needed help. He thought she was joking and smiled politely. She explained that her family was expecting her to arrive at a gathering that evening with a boyfriend. She had told them she was seeing someone even though it was not true. The pressure had grown too much, and she felt trapped. He listened quietly without interrupting. He was not sure why she was telling him all this. Maybe because he looked safe. Maybe because he was a stranger. Told her he was sorry, but he could not help. He had a child and responsibilities and no time for games. She nodded and said she understood, but still looked disappointed. She said she did not need anything serious. Just one day. Just a few hours of pretending. She promised it would be simple. He shook his head again. His life was already complicated enough. Then she noticed the picture on his phone screen when he checked the time. It was of his child smiling with missing teeth. Her face softened. She asked about the child and he answered. Briefly, he did not talk much about his life, but something about her tone felt genuine. She said she admired single parents because they carried more than anyone could see. Those words stayed with him. He was not used to being seen like that, not by strangers, not by anyone. He finished his coffee and stood up ready to leave. She thanked him for listening and wished him a good day. As he walked away, he felt strange, like something unfinished was left behind. At work, his hands moved on their own, fixing parts and cleaning tools, but his mind kept returning to the woman and her request. He thought about how lonely his life had become. Not lonely for romance, but lonely for adult conversation, for being more than just a worker and a dad. When his shift ended, he rushed to pick up his child as usual. They walked home together, talking about school and friends. At home, he cooked dinner and helped with homework later. When the child fell asleep, he sat alone at the table staring at nothing. His phone buzzed with a new message. He did not recognize the number. At first he ignored it, but the buzzing continued. Finally he looked. It was her. She apologized for bothering him and said she found his number on a receipt he had dropped. She said she was running out of options and asked one last time. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought about his child. He thought about the future. He thought about how one small choice could change nothing or everything. After a long moment, he typed a short reply. He said he could only help for a few hours and nothing more. He said his child came first. She replied immediately, saying she understood and thanked him more times than he expected. He put the phone down and felt his heart beat faster. He did not know why he agreed. Maybe it was kindness, maybe curiosity. Or maybe it was the first time in a long while that someone needed him for something other than survival. That night, he barely slept. The next day was coming, and he had no idea how it would change his life. The morning came too fast. He woke up before the alarm and lay still, listening to the quiet. The child was still asleep, Wrapped in a thin blanket, he watched for a moment, feeling a mix of peace and worry. He had agreed to something unusual, and his mind kept asking if it was a mistake. He prepared breakfast like always. Bread, warm milk, and a simple smile for the child. He did not explain much, only said he had to step out for a few hours later. The child nodded, trusting him fully. That trust weighed heavy on his chest, but also gave him strength after. Dropping the child at school, he went home and opened his small closet. He owned very few clothes, most were for work. He picked the cleanest shirt and tried to smooth it with his hands. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not because he looked different, but because he felt different. His phone buzzed. She sent a message asking if he was still okay to come. He replied yes and shared his location. She sent a simple thank you and said she would meet him there when she arrived. He noticed she looked calmer than the day before, but still nervous. Her eyes searched his face like she was checking if he might change his mind. He greeted her politely, and she smiled with relief. They walked together toward the place where her family was waiting. He asked basic questions about what he should know. She told him only what was necessary. She said they did not need to lie too much, just act like they cared about each other. That sentence stayed with him. Act like they cared. He wondered how to act when caring came so naturally to him, especially toward his child. As they entered the building, the noise and movement made him uncomfortable. He was not used to crowds. She gently touched his arm and asked if he was okay. That small gesture surprised him. No one had checked on him like that in a long time. People noticed them right away. Her family greeted them with curious smiles. Questions came quickly. How did they meet? How long had they been together? He answered slowly, choosing honest-sounding words. Without saying too much, he talked about work, responsibility, and family values. Those things were true, even if the situation was felt strange, playing a role yet being himself at the same time. He did not exaggerate. He did not pretend to be rich or impressive. He simply spoke from the life he knew. At one point, someone asked about his child. The room grew quiet. He hesitated, then spoke with pride. He talked about morning routines, packed lunches, and bedtime stories. His voice softened without him realizing. He saw her watching him with a look he could not name. It was not part of the act. He knew that as time passed, the tension eased, laughter felt, more natural conversations flowed. Even forgot to check the time. He felt included, like he belonged somewhere outside his small world. Later, they stepped aside to a quieter space. She thanked him again and said her family seemed to like him. He shrugged and said he was just being honest. She said that honesty was rare for. A moment's silence sat between them, but it did not feel awkward. It felt calm. He realized he was not pretending anymore, at least not inside. But then, a sudden question from a family member cut through the calm, asking about future plans. His heart dropped. He looked at her, unsure what to say. She quickly changed the topic, but the damage was done. He was reminded that this was temporary. A weight returned to his chest. He remembered his promise to keep this simple. Remembered his child waiting at the end of the day. As they prepared to leave, she walked him out and apologized for putting him in that position. He said it was fine, but his voice sounded distant even to himself. They stood outside, not knowing how to end the moment. She asked if he regretted coming. He paused, then said no. He said it felt good to be seen. She nodded slowly, like she understood. More than he said. When they parted ways, he walked alone toward the bus stop. The city felt louder than before. His phone stayed quiet in his pocket. Did not know it yet, but something had shifted. The pretend day was already changing real feelings. And neither of them was prepared for what came next. The next morning, he woke with a heavy feeling in his chest. He remembered the day before and the strange calm that had come with it. He prepared breakfast as usual. The child noticed a small smile and asked if everything was okay. He said yes and gave a quick nod, but his mind was elsewhere. The hours passed slowly. His hands worked on machines as his mind replayed yesterday. The feeling of being noticed and appreciated lingered. He wondered if it was just temporary, or if something deeper was growing inside him. During his lunch break, his phone buzzed with a message from her. She said she could not stop thinking about yesterday and thanked him again. He typed a short reply saying it was nothing, but he could feel his heart beat faster after sending it. The afternoon felt long. He tried to focus, but small memories kept returning, the way she had laughed at small jokes. How her eyes looked when she was worried, he felt uncomfortable admitting to himself that he cared more than he thought he would after. He picked up his child and they walked home. The child talked about school friends and small victories. He listened, but sometimes smiled to himself, thinking about the woman when they got home. The child did homework while he cooked dinner. He felt normal in the routine, but also restless. He kept checking the time. He wondered if she would contact him again, or if yesterday would be just a memory. She called in the evening asking if he could meet for coffee. He hesitated, but agreed he wanted to see if the feelings he felt were real or just confusion. They met at a small, quiet cafe. She looked relieved to see him and apologized for asking so much. He smiled and said it was fine. They sat across from each other and talked about everyday things, weather, work, and simple stories from childhood. He noticed how easy it felt to be around her. For a moment, she became serious and asked how he handled everything alone. He shrugged and said it was not easy, but he did what he had to do. The honesty made her pause. She said she admired him. He felt awkward but pleased at the same time. Then a question came that neither expected. Her family wanted to meet him again soon and asked if he would act like her boyfriend for a longer period. He felt the weight of responsibility immediately. He did not want to disappoint her or her family, but he also feared losing control of his own life. He told her he needed time to think. She nodded, understanding, but he could see the worry in her eyes. He knew this was not just about pretending anymore. There were emotions at stake, and neither had anticipated it. The night came, and he returned home to the quiet house. The child was asleep. He sat alone and thought about the day. He realized he was not just playing a role, he was starting to care about someone outside of his child. He had not expected that to happen. He checked his phone again. The message from her was short, asking if he was thinking. He typed back saying yes and felt a rush of warmth. The next day was filled with tension at work. He kept thinking about how the situation would change if he agreed or refused. He realized that small choices were growing into something bigger. After work, he and the child went to the park. The child played and he watched, thinking about yesterday and today. Now he knew that pretending was becoming real feelings, and he did not know how to handle it. That night she called again. This time she was honest and said she had started to care about him more than she intended. He listened quietly. She was scared and did not know what to do. He admitted he felt the same. They ended the call with a silence full of questions, but also understanding the next day would bring new challenges and maybe new truths. He knew that the pretend day had opened a door. He did not know if they could walk through it together, but he realized there was no going back. Feeling for her had changed everything, even if nothing had officially started yet. The morning came with a chill in the air. He woke up with thoughts swirling in his mind. He remembered the previous days and the strange bond forming with her. He prepared breakfast for the child and gave a small smile. The child asked simple questions about his plans, and he gave quiet answers without revealing too much. After dropping the child at school, he walked through familiar streets. Thinking about how different his life had become in such a short time, he wondered how far he could go with this. Pretending he knew his heart was already involved, and that scared him. She called him on his way to work, asking if he could meet briefly to discuss the next gathering. He agreed, feeling a nervous excitement. He did not know what he would say or how he would act. They met in a quiet corner of a small park. She looked relieved to see him and explained that her family was expecting a story for a longer period. He listened carefully, feeling the weight of the request. He thought about his child and his limited time and responsibilities, but he also noticed the sincerity in her eyes. He said he needed to be honest and set boundaries. She nodded and appreciated his honesty. They discussed limits and how to handle questions in situations. Her careful planning made him feel more comfortable and less like he was stepping blindly into unknown territory. As they talked, they laughed at small jokes and shared little personal stories. He noticed how easy it felt to be near her. She asked about the child, and he shared small stories without revealing too much personal detail. She listened and responded with gentle interest. Suddenly, a thought hit him. He realized he was beginning to imagine a future beyond just the pretend role he felt guilty for. Thinking this way, but also curious and alive in a way he had not felt in years, the day passed slowly. He worked on machines, fixing small problems, but his mind wandered. He kept imagining her smile and the way she looked at him the feelings were growing beyond control, and he feared they might complicate everything when he picked up the child after school, he felt. A small joy seeing their energy and trust, he shared little stories from his day, but kept thoughts of her to himself, the child. Noticed a small smile and asked what he was thinking. He said nothing special and continued walking home that evening. She called again. She spoke with hesitation, saying she felt guilty for involving him, but could not deny that she had begun to care. She said the pretend role had become confusing because real feelings were involved. He listened quietly, knowing she was right. He admitted he felt the same. They decided to meet the next day to practice some parts of the story for her family. She was nervous, but insisted on honesty within the pretend act. He agreed, feeling protective and careful not to hurt her or complicate the situation further. That night he sat alone, watching the quiet house. He thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly things could shift. He realized that pretending had opened the door to something real, and that they were both stepping into unknown territory. He thought about his child and the responsibilities waiting in the morning. The balance between duty and desire weighed heavily on him, but also made him feel alive. The next day arrived, and he prepared carefully. He chose clothes that were clean and presentable, but still simple. He wanted to appear respectful, yet true to himself. He met her at the agreed spot, and they walked together toward the place they were practicing the story. As they rehearsed small details, laughter and moments of genuine concern appeared naturally. They found that pretending required less acting than they had feared. Their conversations flowed more like real life than performance. He realized the feelings he had were not acting at all. When they parted, she thanked him again, and he felt a small warmth that spread through his chest. He knew that the days ahead would be challenging, but also full of new experiences. Returning home, he found the child asleep. He sat for a long time reflecting on how pretending had become real. He realized that honesty and careful boundaries were the only way forward. He also knew that love was quietly growing between them, even if neither fully admitted it. Yet the morning was quiet. He woke up early as usual and prepared breakfast for the child. The small routine felt comforting, but his mind was already moving ahead to the day. He knew this would be the day the pretend story ended or changed forever. After dropping the child at school, he walked through familiar streets. Thinking about how everything had shifted, he remembered the first meeting with her. In the unusual request, it felt like a lifetime ago, and yet also like yesterday. She called him while he walked and suggested meeting before the final gathering. He agreed, feeling a nervous excitement. He wondered if they would be able to keep up the act, or if real feelings would take over completely. They met at a small cafe and talked quietly about what might happen later. She was nervous, but also smiling at moments. He reassured her gently, saying that honesty had always worked between them. She nodded and took a deep breath. As they arrived at the gathering, they were greeted warmly. Her family seemed curious, but friendly. They asked questions as usual, and he answered simply and honestly without exaggeration. He noticed her glance at him now and then, and felt a strange warmth in his chest. During the gathering, a question came that no one expected. A distant relative asked if they truly cared for each other, and if the pretend story had any truth. He felt the blood rush to his face, but she calmly said that even pretending had shown them that honesty and respect were more important than appearances. He realized in that moment that pretending had revealed something real between them. Her family looked at them differently. Now with curiosity, but also respect. He felt a small relief, but also a deeper connection with her. Left the gathering quietly and walked together in the evening air. She thanked him again and said that she could not have imagined anyone handling the situation with such patience and honesty. He smiled softly, saying it was not difficult because he had chosen to be honest. Conversation grew quieter and more personal. They talked about hopes, dreams, and fears. She admitted that she had begun to care for him in a way that went beyond the pretend story. He looked at her and said the same thing quietly. He felt a small fear, but also an excitement that he had not felt in years. They arrived at a quiet park and sat on a bench watching the sun lower into the sky. The silence was comfortable and full of meaning. He realized that the pretend story had brought them to this moment, and that what had started as a favor had become something real. She spoke softly, asking if he could see a future together. He hesitated, thinking about the child and responsibilities, but also realizing that love and trust were part of life. He said that he could see a future if they were careful and honest. She nodded and took his hand gently. For the first time, he felt a calm certainty in his chest. The pretend story was over, but something real had begun. They knew it would not be easy, but they had both learned that honesty, kindness, and respect mattered more than appearances. Returning home, he found the child awake, and waiting, he knelt and hugged the child, who smiled and asked about his day. He answered simply and shared a small story. The child noticed a small glow in his eyes and asked if he had met someone new. He smiled quietly and said maybe, but did not explain more. That night, he sat alone, thinking about how quickly life could change. One small choice had brought new experiences, emotions, and hope. He realized that love often appeared in unexpected ways, and that being open and honest had made it possible. He checked his phone and saw a message from her saying that she felt safe and grateful, and that she looked forward to tomorrow. They had crossed the line from pretending to something real, and both understood that life was about careful steps, courage, and trust. He put the phone down and watched the quiet room, thinking about the child, the past, and the future. He knew that challenges would come, but also that life had brought him unexpected happiness in the most unusual ways. The night grew deeper, and the house remained quiet. He felt content in a way he had not known for years. The pretend story had ended, but real feelings had begun, and he was ready to face what came next with honesty and an open heart. The morning light came softly through the window. He woke up before the child and took a moment to sit quietly on the edge of the bed, thought about the past days and the changes that had come into his life. He had learned that a single choice could bring unexpected experiences and feelings. He prepared breakfast with care. The child entered the kitchen, rubbing eyes and smiling at him. He shared small jokes and stories as they ate. The room was filled with warmth and simple happiness. He noticed the small moments mattered more than grand gestures. After dropping the child at school, he walked slowly to work, thinking about the woman and their last meeting. The pretend day had ended, but the feelings it had started were growing. He felt nervous and excited at the same time. He realized that this new chapter was not simple or easy, but it felt right. At work, he moved through his routine, fixing machines and cleaning equipment. His hands were busy, but his mind wandered to her words and the small gestures that had made him feel alive. She had called the night before to say she was thinking about him and wanted to meet later. He agreed silently, feeling both anticipation and caution. After work, he went to a quiet cafe where they had agreed to meet. She was already there, looking calm, but with a hint of excitement. He smiled and waved, and she waved back. They sat together and began talking about small, everyday things, whether work and simple moments from their pasts. The conversation felt natural and flowing. They shared stories about family experiences. He talked about his child and small daily routines. She listened carefully and asked gentle questions. She shared small moments from her life that she had never told anyone before. He felt honored to hear them and grateful for the trust. The afternoon passed slowly and naturally. They walked together through a park, noticing the changing colors of leaves and the quiet sounds of nature. The air felt fresh, and their conversation became deeper. They discussed hopes and fears about the future and how life could be unpredictable. She asked if he had ever imagined finding someone he could trust and care for so easily. He hesitated, thinking about responsibilities and the child, but admitted that he had begun to feel connected to her. He saw a soft smile form and realized they were both feeling the same shift in their hearts. They stopped by a small bench overlooking a pond. He watched the ripples in the water and thought about the journey from a simple favor to real emotions. She spoke softly about feeling nervous yet hopeful. He nodded in agreement and said that honesty and care had made everything possible. They planned how to meet again in ways that would not disrupt his child or daily life. They agreed on small visits and careful communication. They laughed at small jokes and shared simple observations that made the moments feel light and easy. After leaving the park, he picked up the child from school. They walked home together, sharing small stories and little victories from the day. The child noticed a small change in his mood and asked about it. He smiled and said it was nothing important, but he knew The child sensed something special at home. He prepared dinner and helped with homework. The routine felt grounding and comforting. He reflected on how balance could be achieved. Between responsibilities and new beginnings, he realized that love and care could coexist with duty and protectiveness. In the evening, he called her to check how she was. She sounded happy and calm and shared small plans for the coming days. They talked quietly about life and the importance of trust and honesty in building anything lasting. The conversation ended with a promise to meet soon and continue carefully. Sat alone later, reflecting on the quiet house and the events of the past week. I thought about how a single choice to help someone had transformed his days and feelings. He realized that life was fragile and precious, and that genuine connections mattered more than convenience. The night grew deeper, and the house was silent, except for soft breathing from the child. He felt a calm warmth in his chest, knowing that the pretend story had blossomed into something real and meaningful. He also felt ready to face challenges with honesty and care, knowing that love was slowly becoming a part of his life. He checked his phone one last time and saw a message from her saying she was thinking of him and looking forward to the next meeting. He smiled and placed the phone down, feeling a quiet excitement and a sense of hope that this new journey was only beginning. Woke up before the child and sat quietly. On the edge of the bed, thinking about the past week, he realized how quickly life could change. A simple choice to help someone had led to new emotions and experiences. He prepared breakfast carefully, watching the child eat and noticing the small details that made life feel meaningful. After dropping the child at school, he walked through familiar streets, thinking about how the relationship with her had grown beyond the pretend day. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that the next steps could change everything. He arrived at work and started the day fixing machines. The routine was familiar and comforting, but his mind wandered to her calls and messages. They had shared small moments and honest conversations, and he realized how much he looked forward to seeing her again. During lunch, he sat alone, thinking about how to balance his responsibilities. With the growing connection, he realized that honesty and patience were important, and that he could not rush feelings or decisions. He felt grateful for the chance to care for someone beyond his child's. After work, he met her at a quiet cafe. They sat and talked about small things like weather and neighborhood events, but the conversation gradually turned deeper. They shared hopes and fears and discussed what honesty meant to each of them. He realized that their connection was real and that it required careful nurturing. They walked together to a park where the trees were turning colors with the season. The air was crisp, and the quiet of the park made conversation easier. They noticed small details in the world around them and shared stories from their pasts. The stories were simple, but revealed character and values. They laughed at small incidents and felt comfortable in each other's presence. She asked how he managed to stay strong while raising the child alone. He explained the daily routines and how responsibility shaped him. He also admitted that moments like these made him feel alive, and that connection with another person mattered greatly. She nodded in understanding and shared similar feelings about her own life. They continued meeting quietly over the next few days, sharing small moments and learning more about each other. He noticed her thoughtfulness and careful approach to life. She noticed his quiet strength and patience with challenges. They learned to communicate honestly and to respect boundaries while allowing feelings to grow naturally. One afternoon, they visited a small bookstore. They browsed quietly and shared opinions on books. They discussed dreams for the future and what they hoped for their lives. They laughed at silly ideas and felt light in the company of each other. He realized that being understood and appreciated for who he was brought him more joy than he had expected. After leaving the bookstore, they walked through quiet streets. Noticing the simple beauty of life, they talked about small acts of kindness and how those acts shaped people. They realized that caring and honesty could build trust and deepen connections without grand gestures. Home, he continued his routines with the child. Cooking meals, helping with homework, and sharing bedtime stories became small acts of love that grounded him. He noticed the child asking small questions about his day, and he smiled, quietly knowing that the child sensed changes in his life. He and she exchanged messages throughout the day, sharing thoughts and small details they discussed. plans for the coming days and careful steps for meetings, he felt a growing trust and respect and realized that patience and honesty were slowly shaping something meaningful. One weekend they planned a longer meeting. They visited a small park by the river where the water flowed quietly. They walked along the edge, noticing small birds and plants. They shared personal stories about childhood friends, school experiences, and family traditions. The sharing built trust and allowed them to see each other as real people beyond any pretend story. During the walk, she asked him if he could imagine a life together. He hesitated, thinking about responsibilities and the child, but admitted that he could see a future built slowly and honestly. She smiled softly and squeezed his hand gently. He realized that small gestures could mean more than words, and that care was shown through actions. They paused to watch the sunset. Over the river, he noticed the light reflecting on the water and felt a quiet peace. He realized that life had brought unexpected happiness, and that the pretend day had opened the door to something real. They did not rush or force anything, but allowed feelings to grow naturally. Returning home, he focused on preparing dinner for the child. They shared stories about their day and small accomplishments. He noticed the child laughing freely and felt a sense of gratitude for the small routines that kept life steady. He realized that responsibility and new connections could coexist and enrich life. In the evening, she called to share small updates about her day. They discussed plans and shared thoughts on honesty, trust, and patience. He listened carefully and shared his own reflections. They ended the call with a quiet promise to continue slowly and carefully, allowing trust and feelings to grow naturally. The next week continued with careful meetings and quiet communication. They shared small moments in cafes, parks, and walks through familiar streets. Each meeting revealed new insights and allowed them to appreciate character and values. They laughed at small things and supported each other with patience and care. He noticed how natural it felt to spend time with her, and how her presence brought comfort and quiet joy. She noticed the same qualities in him and admired his patience, strength, and honesty. They realized that small, consistent gestures of care were more important than grand declarations at home. He balanced routines with the child and meetings with her. He realized that life required careful attention to responsibilities and emotions. He felt gratitude for the growing connection and knew that patience and honesty would continue to shape their relationship. One evening, they planned a quiet dinner at a small restaurant. They talked about their values, life experiences, and what they hoped for the future. He realized that connection required listening, understanding, and care. She realized the same, and they felt a deepening trust and respect for each other. Walked home slowly, noticing small details in the world around them. The quiet moments allowed them to reflect on feelings in the journey that had started with a simple request. He felt a growing sense of hope and possibility. She felt the same and appreciated the slow, careful pace that allowed feelings to grow naturally. At home, he helped the child with homework, prepared bedtime routines, and shared quiet stories. He noticed the child's curiosity and happiness and felt a sense of pride and gratitude. He realized that life could hold multiple responsibilities and connections, and that balance was possible with care and honesty. Following weeks continued with careful meetings, quiet conversations, and shared experiences. They visited parks, cafes, and small shops. Sharing stories and observing life, they discussed dreams, fears, and hopes for the future, and learned to trust each other more. With each passing day, he noticed how her kindness and thoughtfulness complemented his patience and responsibility. She noticed how his honesty and care made her feel safe and understood. They realized that true connection was built on trust, respect, and quiet moments of understanding rather than grand gestures. One afternoon, they walked along a quiet street discussing small acts of kindness and how these shaped people. He shared simple routines from his life. She shared small family traditions. They laughed at small incidents and reflected on the ways that care and honesty could strengthen relationships. At home, he continued his daily routines with the child, preparing meals, helping with homework, and sharing bedtime stories. He noticed the child's joy and curiosity and felt grateful for the balance between responsibility and new connection. He realized that love could grow slowly and meaningfully through consistent care. The evenings he and she shared quiet conversations. Over phone messages discussing plans, hopes, and reflections, they exchanged thoughts on trust, honesty, patience, and kindness. He felt a growing sense of connection and understood that meaningful relationships required careful attention and respect. 1. Weekend, they planned a day at a quiet garden. They walked slowly, noticing flowers, birds, and the soft rustle of leaves. They shared stories about childhood experiences, favorite memories, and simple dreams for the future. The quiet companionship strengthened their trust and allowed feelings to grow naturally. They paused to sit on a bench and watch the sky change colors with the day. He felt a quiet happiness and calm. She felt the same, and they shared a small smile without words. They realized that connection was shown in actions and shared moments, and in the patience to allow feelings to develop naturally. Returning home, he focused on the child routines. Meals, homework, and stories. The balance between responsibilities and new connection required careful thought but brought joy and fulfillment. He realized that life could hold multiple meaningful relationships if approached with honesty and care. The evenings, they continued to exchange messages, sharing small details and thoughts they discussed. How to continue meetings, carefully respecting responsibilities and emotions. He felt grateful for the growing trust and sense of possibility. She felt the same, and they appreciated the slow pace that allowed connection to deepen naturally. The weeks continued with quiet routines, small meetings, and shared experiences. Each encounter revealed character, values, and kindness. He noticed her thoughtfulness and care. She noticed his patience and reliability. They realized that true connection required honesty, trust, and patience more than words or gestures. One quiet evening, they walked along a familiar street observing life. He shared reflections about responsibility and connection. She shared her hopes and fears. They laughed at small incidents and appreciated the small details in life. He felt gratitude for the journey that had begun with a simple favor. She felt the same, and they recognized the care and honesty that had made connection possible. At home, he continued daily routines with the child. He noticed curiosity, happiness, and small victories, and felt a sense of pride and gratitude. He realized that responsibility and connection could coexist and enrich life when approached with care and attention. In the evenings, they shared quiet moments over calls and messages. They discussed values, honesty, patience, and trust, and reflected on the growth of their connection. He felt hope and calm. She felt the same, and they understood that meaningful connection required time, care, and attention. As the weeks passed, they continued to build trust and understanding. Each small meeting and quiet conversation strengthened their bond. They learned to appreciate character, values, and kindness. He noticed her thoughtfulness and care. She noticed his patience and honesty. They realized that meaningful connection was built through consistent care and shared experiences rather than dramatic gestures. One afternoon, they sat in a quiet garden, observing nature. He reflected on the journey. From a simple request to real emotions, she reflected on the same, and they shared quiet smiles. The connection had grown beyond pretense, and they recognized the care, patience, and honesty that had made it possible. Returning home, he focused on the child and daily routines. He noticed the small joys and simple happiness in life, and felt grateful for the balance between responsibility and connection. He realized that love and care could coexist with duty and attention. In the evenings, they continued sharing reflections, plans, and thoughts. They exchanged small stories, hopes and fears, and appreciated the slow pace that allowed connection to deepen. He felt calm and hopeful. She felt the same, and they understood that meaningful relationships required patience, honesty, and care. The days continued with quiet companionship, small shared experiences, and careful attention to responsibilities. They learned to trust each other, appreciate character, and value kindness. He noticed her thoughtfulness. She noticed his patience and reliability. They realized that connection was strengthened through consistency, care, and shared understanding. One evening, they walked through a quiet street observing life. He reflected on the changes since the simple request. She reflected on the growth of their connection. They shared quiet smiles and understood that care, patience, and honesty had transformed a simple favor into meaningful connection. At home, he continued routines with the child, preparing meals, helping with homework and sharing stories. He noticed the child's curiosity, joy, and small victories and felt gratitude. He realized that responsibility and connection could coexist and enrich life when approached with care and attention. In the evenings, they shared quiet conversations, reflecting on growth, trust, honesty, and patience. He felt hope and calm. She felt the same, and they recognized that meaningful connection required time, attention, and care. The weeks continued with quiet meetings, small shared experiences, and careful attention to responsibilities each day revealed character, values, and kindness. They learned to appreciate each other and realized that connection was built on honesty, trust, patience, and shared experience rather than grand gestures. One afternoon, they sat on a quiet bench observing nature. He reflected on the journey from a simple request to real emotions. She reflected on the same, and they shared quiet smiles. They understood that care, patience, and honesty had transformed the pretend day into meaningful connection. Returning home, he focused on daily routines, and the child he noticed small joys and simple happiness and felt gratitude. He realized that love, care, and responsibility could coexist and enrich life when approached with attention and honesty. In the evenings, they continued sharing thoughts, reflections, and plans. They discussed honesty, patience, trust, and the growth of their connection. He felt hope and calm. She felt the same, and they understood that meaningful connection required time, care, and attention. The days continued with quiet companionship, small shared experiences, and careful attention to responsibilities. Each encounter strengthened trust and understanding. They learned to appreciate character and value kindness. He noticed her thoughtfulness. She noticed his patience. They realized that meaningful connection was built through consistency, care, and shared understanding. One evening, they walked through familiar streets observing life. He reflected on the growth of connection. She reflected on the same, and they shared quiet smiles. They understood that care, patience, and honesty had transformed a simple request into a meaningful and real connection. At home, he continued routines with the child, preparing meals, helping with homework, and sharing stories. He noticed the child's curiosity, joy, and small victories, and felt gratitude. He realized that responsibility and connection could coexist and enrich life when approached with care and attention. In the evenings, they shared quiet conversations, reflecting on trust, honesty, patience, and the growth of their connection. He felt hope and calm. She felt the same, and they recognized that meaningful connection required time, attention, and care. The weeks continued with quiet meetings, small shared experiences, and careful attention to responsibilities. Each day revealed character, values, and kindness. They appreciated each other and realized that connection was strengthened through honesty, patience, care, and shared experience rather than grand gestures. One afternoon, they sat quietly observing the world around them. He reflected on the journey from a simple request to real emotions. She reflected on the same, and they shared quiet smiles. They understood that care, patience, and honesty had transformed a pretend day into a meaningful connection. He woke up before the child and sat quietly on the edge of the bed, thinking about the weeks that had passed. The pretend day that had started as a small favor had transformed into a meaningful connection. He prepared breakfast carefully, watching the child eat and noticing the small details that made life feel significant. After dropping the child at school, he walked through the familiar streets, thinking about the growing relationship with her. He felt excitement and nervousness, knowing that the next steps could bring change and deeper feelings at work. He focused on routine tasks, fixing machines and cleaning equipment, but his mind wandered to the messages and calls they had exchanged. He noticed how much he looked forward to seeing her again and how their conversations had become a source of comfort and joy. During lunch, he sat alone, reflecting on how to balance responsibilities with the connection. He realized that patience, honesty, and small, consistent gestures were important. He felt grateful for the opportunity to care for someone beyond his child and for the chance to share experiences and trust. After work, he met her at a quiet cafe. They shared stories about the day and simple moments from their lives. Gradually, the conversation turned deeper. They discussed hopes, fears, and reflections about the future and about connection. They realized that honesty and understanding were stronger than pretending, and that trust could grow through small actions. They walked together through a park, noticing the colors of the trees. In the quiet sounds of nature, the air was crisp and conversation flowed easily. They shared memories from childhood, school, and family traditions. They laughed at small incidents and found comfort in each other's presence. She asked how he managed to raise a child alone. He described routines, small victories, challenges, and the lessons he had learned. He admitted that moments with her made him feel alive and connected. She listened and shared her feelings about responsibility and trust. They felt a quiet understanding growing between them over the next several days. They continued meeting quietly, sharing coffee, walks, and visits to small places. They exchanged personal stories and reflections. They learned to appreciate character and values and to trust in each other's intentions. He noticed her thoughtfulness. She noticed his patience and honesty. They began to understand that meaningful connection required time, care, and consistency. One afternoon, they visited a small bookstore and browsed quietly. They discussed books' childhood, memories, and dreams for the future. They laughed at small ideas and shared observations. He felt understood and appreciated. She felt safe and valued. They realized that simple moments could strengthen bonds more than grand gestures. After leaving the bookstore, they walked along quiet streets. Serving life, he reflected on the journey from a small favor to real feelings. She reflected on the same, and they smiled quietly, understanding that connection was growing naturally at home. He focused on the child routines, cooking meals, helping with homework, and sharing bedtime stories. The small responsibilities grounded him and gave perspective. He noticed the child's happiness and curiosity and felt grateful for the balance between duties and new connections. The evenings, they exchanged quiet messages, sharing thoughts, small details, and reflections. They discussed honesty, trust, patience, and care. They planned careful meetings and considered each other's schedules. He felt grateful for the growing connection. She appreciated the slow pace that allowed feelings to develop naturally. One weekend, they spent a day in a quiet garden, walking slowly and noticing nature. They shared personal stories, favorite memories, and small dreams for the future. The calm surroundings allowed trust to deepen and feelings to grow. They realized that careful attention and patience strengthened their bond. They paused on a bench, watching the sky change colors, and felt a quiet happiness and calm. He realized that life had given him unexpected joy. She realized the same, and they smiled, understanding the importance of patience and care in building a lasting connection. Returning home, he continued daily routines with the child, preparing meals, helping with homework, and sharing bedtime stories. He noticed small joys and simple happiness and felt gratitude for the balance between responsibility and connection. The evenings, they shared reflections over phone calls and messages, discussing growth, trust, honesty, and patience. They strengthened their understanding. He felt hope and calm. She felt the same. They recognized that meaningful connection required attention, care, and time. Over the following weeks, they continued quiet meetings and small shared experiences. Observing life in cafes, parks, and streets, they shared stories about character, values, and kindness. Each encounter strengthened trust and appreciation. He noticed her thoughtfulness. She noticed his patience. They realized that meaningful connection was built on honesty, care, and consistent small actions. Afternoon, they sat quietly in a park, observing nature. He reflected on the journey from a pretend favor to meaningful connection. She reflected on the same. They shared a quiet smile, understanding that care, patience, and honesty had transformed their relationship. Returning home, he focused on responsibilities with the child. He noticed small victories, curiosity, and joy, and felt gratitude for the ability to balance life and connection. He realized that love and duty could coexist when approached with attention and care. Evenings were spent exchanging reflections, plans, and thoughts. They discussed values, honesty, trust, patience, and the growth of their relationship. He felt hope. She felt the same. They recognized that connection required care, attention, and consistent effort. Weeks passed with quiet companionship, small, shared experiences, and attention to responsibilities. Each day revealed character values and kindness. They appreciated each other and learned that trust and honesty were more important than dramatic gestures. One afternoon, they walked along familiar streets, observing life and sharing reflections. He realized how far they had come. She realized the same. They shared quiet smiles, acknowledging that patience, care, and honesty had transformed the pretend day into a real and meaningful connection. Homie maintained daily routines, preparing meals, helping with homework, and sharing stories. He noticed the child's happiness, curiosity, and small victories, and felt gratitude. He understood that responsibilities and connection could coexist and enrich life with care and attention. In the evenings, they shared quiet conversations, reflecting on trust, honesty, patience, and growth of connection. He felt calm and hopeful. She felt the same, understanding that meaningful connection required time, care, and attention.